The rooftop terrace of the Asteria floated above the city like a white ship adrift on a sea of glass and steel. 64 floors up, the skyline stretched endlessly beneath a hard blue sky unmarred by clouds. Tables draped in crisp linen gleamed under the midday sun, and guests in tailored suits and flowing dresses raised flutes of champagne, their laughter mingling with the clink of crystal. The air carried a faint breeze, just enough to tease napkins from plates and send them skittering across the polished stone floor. No one paid much attention to the low railing at the terrace's edge, a sleek barrier of steel and glass that shimmered like a mirage. No one, that is, except two little boys. They were twins, no older than 5, mirror images of each other down to their teal vests, crisp white shirts, navy shorts, white socks, and polished black shoes. Their dark hair curled slightly at the ends, and their eyes, wide with the curiosity of childhood, followed a napkin that the breeze had stolen from a nearby table. It danced across the terrace, a white flag of rebellion, and they chased it, giggling, their small feet pattering against the stone. Their father, a man in a charcoal suit with a glass in hand, stood at the center of a small crowd, his voice rising and falling in animated conversation. He gestured broadly, his attention fixed on a story he was telling, oblivious to the twins' game. The nanny, a young woman in a beige dress, sat at a nearby table, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone, her fingers scrolling through a feed that held her captive. Other guests smiled, sipped, and turned back to their own circles, assuming someone else was watching the boys. Someone always was, wasn't there? Nia Campbell was watching. She stood near the railing, a black waitress in a bright red uniform that stood out like a flare against the terrace's muted elegance. A white apron hugged her waist, and a matching headpiece sat neatly atop her braided hair. Yellow cleaning gloves stretched up to her elbows, still damp from polishing the steel rail to a mirror shine. She wasn't new to the Asteria. She knew its rhythms, its demands. She carried a plastic tub for collecting dishes, her eyes flicking across the terrace out of habit, not panic. She noticed the twins the moment the napkin lifted into the air, caught by a stronger gust. It fluttered toward the railing, and the boys followed, their laughter rising as they reached for it. One twin, bolder or simply faster, swung a leg onto the lower bar of the railing. The other copied him instantly, as twins often do, their movements synchronized like a dance. "You're safe," she said, mostly to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Her gloves shook as she peeled them off, letting them fall to the stone floor like yellow petals. A path opened through the crowd, shoes pounding against the stone. A man's voice cracked with fear, raw and broken. "Elliot, Evan!" The twins' father broke through, his suit flawless but his face stripped bare, pale with terror. He dropped to his knees, sweeping the boys into his arms, his hands shaking as he pressed them to his chest. "Oh God," he whispered, his voice breaking. The boys clung to him, hiccuping with sobs, but their small hands still reached for Nia, their fingers brushing her arm as they buried their faces in their father's jacket. He looked up at her, and for a moment, the noise of the terrace faded. "You saved them," he said, his voice low but trembling. "You pulled them back." Nia stood, her breath still ragged, the imprint of their wrists lingering in her muscles like a bruise. She nodded once, unsure what to say. She hadn't done it for thanks. She hadn't thought at all. She'd just moved. Behind them, the guests began speaking again, their voices a low hum of disbelief. Some gestured toward the railing, reenacting what they'd seen, as if movement could make sense of it. Others kept murmuring, their words overlapping. "She just ran. Did you see her lean out?" They were gone, and she caught them. The father rose, keeping a protective hand on each boy's shoulder. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice steadier now, but still soft. Nia shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Does it matter?" He gave a short, humorless laugh, the kind that comes from surviving something unthinkable. "Edward Langford. These are my sons." His gaze softened, his eyes searching her face. "And you've given me back more than I can ever repay?" Security arrived minutes later, breathless and wide-eyed, their radios crackling with urgency. They questioned Nia briefly, their voices clipped as they scribbled notes. The manager, a thin man with a pinched face, hovered nearby, torn between reprimanding her for breaking service protocol and recognizing that her actions had just saved the Asteria from a tragedy that would have lingered in headlines for years. They reviewed the building's camera footage, the grainy images confirming what the guests had seen. 2 boys climbing, a napkin fluttering, Nia's red uniform flashing as she lunged. Edward kept close to his sons, his hands never leaving their shoulders, but his eyes tracked Nia as she quietly returned to a table she'd abandoned earlier, gathering plates and glasses as if it were just another shift. She didn't want the spotlight. That wasn't why she'd run. 2 hours later, the lunch crowd had thinned. The terrace quieter now, the air heavy with the weight of what had happened. Edward approached her again, the twins in tow, their faces still pale but calmer now. "They wanted to say something," he said, nodding toward the boys. They shuffled forward, their matching vests wrinkled, their hair mussed from the wind. "Thank you," they said together, their voices small but clear, their eyes fixed on her face. Nia crouched to their level, her smile soft but genuine. "You're welcome? But promise me you'll be careful near edges. No more peeking over, okay?" They nodded solemnly, their small hands clasped together. Edward pulled an envelope from his jacket and held it out to her. She frowned, her hand stilling on her apron. "That's not necessary," she said, her voice firm. "It is," he replied, his tone equally resolute. "This isn't payment. It's gratitude. And a phone number. If you ever need anything, you call me." She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the envelope before taking it. She tucked it into her apron pocket, nodding once. That night, the video surfaced. A guest had filmed everything, the boys climbing the rail, the napkin fluttering into the void, Nia's red uniform cutting through the crowd, her body leaning impossibly far over the edge. The moment she held both boys, their small bodies dangling over 64 stories, was frozen in time, her yellow gloves stark against the blue sky. The video spread like wildfire across the internet, shared and reshared with captions like "Waitress saves twins from fall" and "Miracle on the Asteria." Comments flooded in, thousands of them, calling her fearless, a guardian angel, a woman who deserved a medal. Parents shared the video with captions about vigilance and second chances. Reporters called the Asteria, asking for interviews, for a chance to speak with the waitress who'd become a viral sensation. Nia declined them all. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted to go back to work, to make rent, to call her mother and check on her little brother, who was probably sprawled on the couch with a comic book, oblivious to the chaos of her day. But Edward Langford wasn't done. A week later, he returned to the Asteria unannounced, this time in casual clothes and navy sweater and jeans, a far cry from the tailored suit he'd worn before. The twins were with him, their teal vests replaced with matching green jackets, their faces brighter now, though they still clung to his hands. He waited until Nia was on her break, then asked her to join them at a corner table, away from the bustle of the lunch service. She sat, her red uniform slightly wrinkled from a long shift, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking about that day," Edward began, his voice quiet but deliberate. "I've been thinking about how, in a room full of people including me, you were the only one who moved." Nia shook her head, her braids shifting against her shoulder. "Anyone would have," she said, her voice soft but firm. "No," he said, leaning forward, his eyes locked on hers. "They didn't. You did." He paused, glancing at the twins, who were watching her with wide, curious eyes. "Elliot and Evan haven't stopped talking about you," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "They keep asking when they can see the lady in the red dress again." Nia laughed, a quiet sound that broke the tension. "It's just a uniform," she said, glancing down at herself. "But I'm glad they're okay." Edward leaned back, his expression softening. "I don't know what you do when you're not here," he said. "I don't know your story. But I know you gave me back my sons, and that's not something I'll ever forget." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, sliding it across the table. "I meant what I said about the phone number. It's not just gratitude. It's a promise. If you ever need help, a job, a favor, anything, you call me." Nia looked at the card, her fingers brushing its edge. She didn't know Edward Langford's name carried weight in circles she'd never entered: boardrooms, penthouses, places where money moved like water. She didn't know he was a man whose wealth could open doors or close them. To her, he was just a father, pale with fear, who'd nearly lost his sons. She nodded, tucking the card into her pocket. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it.